Widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path. A path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Tonight's episode is Female Future of Faith.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Created in the Image of God. I'm your host, Wade Franson, and we have a very exciting show tonight, an amazing guest. I think I first met with her 6 months or so ago. Been planning this show for some time. A lot has changed in the world since then, and the topic of tonight's show will give us a lens on some of what's going on in the background. As some of you know, on this show, one of the themes that I like to talk about is what I call the hidden leaven, the woman who had 3 measures of meal, which is actually about 60 pounds, if I'm not mistaken. And she put some leaven in that. And Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is like that. But the word that he used was that she hid the leaven in this 60 pounds, which is a large amount. So sprinkled throughout the world is this hidden leaven that is doing its work under God's direction to transform the world, to transform the planet. It's a slow process. It's organic. We have free will. It 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But tonight we have a guest who's going to give us some unique insight into that overall situation. Her name is Gina Zurlo, and she's a leading scholar on the topic of world Christianity. She holds a PhD in that field, and she is a senior researcher and lecturer in world Christianity at Harvard Divinity School. She's focused on religious demography. She's the editor of the World Christian Database and visiting research fellow with Boston University's Institute on Culture, Religion, and World Affairs. She tracks how religious and non-religious affiliation is changing in every country on this planet. And looking at it from a past, present, and future perspective. She has a special focus on gender and the female future of global faith. She was named one of BBC's 100 Most Influential and Inspiring Women of 2019 for her pioneering work with religious statistics. Gina stands at the intersection of history, sociology, and data, helping the church and the wider public understand what Christianity actually looks like worldwide today and where it's headed. Let's welcome Gina into the studio.
Hi, good to see you.
It's great to see you, and it's really exciting to have you here on the show. As I mentioned, there's a lot going on in the world. We're not going to get into the specifics of geopolitics, but we want to look at the underlying situation. We have changing weather here where I live in Wisconsin. It's been a bit chilly today. I have a little bit of a cold. I was watching my son play tennis, and I've been down in my downstairs office. And when you want to fix, you have to go into the boiler room and understand, is everything working fine? And it's kind of like under the hood of a car. So you've got visibility into demographics and trends of what's going on underneath the surface. And we're going to get into that. But before we do, let's get to know you a little bit more. So tell us a little bit about who your parents were, where you were born, so we can get to know the real you, the Gina that was just figuring things out before you really came to the awareness of how you wanted to focus your adult life on these topics.
Sure. So the way I usually start in discussing this is I haven't met a little girl yet who says, I want to be a demographer of religion when I grow up. So it was definitely not a straight path for me from childhood to this very niche field in the sociology of religion. So I grew up in upstate New York in largely an Italian American home. And my grandparents, my great grandparents came from Italy. Luigi DeMarco and Palma Rosa Penza came from Italy to the U.S. And I very much grew up in that culture of big family dinners and Sunday dinner and stir the sauce and all of that was a really important part of my identity. My father is from Brooklyn and my mother from Yonkers. And my dad actually is half Irish, half Italian. We love him nonetheless. And my dad is Catholic and my mom is Protestant. And so we actually had a lot of like ecumenical tension in my household growing up because of this Catholic Protestant marriage. But my mother's father, my grandfather, said that it was okay that my dad was Catholic because at least he's half Italian. That covers a multitude of sins. So very strong Italian identity, but Italian Protestants, which was interesting, that my kind of family lineage traces this very strong Italian Protestant heritage. And so I kind of had these questions in my home growing up of different branches of Christianity right from the jump. And as a child, I was always interested in global things. My favorite cartoon was the Animaniacs when Yakko did the countries of the world to the tune of the Mexican hat dance song. I'm going to spare you and not sing it, but you can Google it and it's on YouTube. So please check it out. But it's from 1993, of course. And I didn't know at the time as a child watching this what Germany now in one piece meant. What I know what that means now, but at the time in 1993, I had no idea. And so I was just like fascinated with what's happening outside of my own little bubble in upstate New York, different people, different religions, different cultures. Um, and so all that kind of aside, I ended up going to undergrad for music, which did not at all really tap into these kind of global interests and these religious interests. I mean, in high school, I read the Bhagavad Gita for fun, and I was a part of Students for a Free Tibet and like all this kind of global stuff. And I ended up becoming a music major. But in my last semester of my undergrad degree at Ithaca College, I was working with a Jewish studies professor and doing ethnographic research in synagogues in upstate New York, looking at different liturgical songs in synagogues among different Jewish traditions and denominations to see how these songs are interpreted and understood among different Jewish communities. I can't even tell you how I ended up doing this, honestly. It was really far afield from what I was doing in my program. But I fell in love with research during that time, talking to people, learning about different interpretations of culture and music and history and identity and religion. And it really started to tap into some of these things from my childhood that I always had interest in, but frankly, never thought I could do anything with as a career. The Animaniacs and religion, how do those two things come together as a career? And I remember going back to this professor really upset saying, I've wasted my whole undergrad degree. I'm in my last semester of school and I'm just now discovering the thing that I think I really want to do, which is social science. And right, I'm like 20 years old saying I wasted my whole life, you know? And I remember this Jewish studies professor calmed me down and she said, look, my undergrad, my master's, and my PhD are all in three completely different subjects, and it all worked out for me. I think you'll be fine. So then I went to seminary and I studied religion in seminary. And that's where I discovered the work of the World Christian Database. And even though I had done qualitative research in this kind of Jewish liturgical music project, the World Christian Database introduced me to the quantitative study of Christianity and other world religions. And from the moment I saw this for the first time in my first semester of my master's program, I said, that's the thing for me. There was just something about it that I had never seen before. I had never seen a religion statistic or a religion graph, probably. And it just sparked something in me of this is the way I want to understand what's happening in the world. The big picture, maps, charts, graphs, all the world's religions kind of in this big global picture. it just really struck me. And I started working at the World Christian Database that semester. And almost 20 years later, I run the World Christian Database project. It was the project for me. And really, the only thing I've done in my adult life professionally is work on the World Christian Database project and work in the demography of religion.
Well, that's an amazing story. And I actually love that sort of eclectic, diverse background. Clearly you bring a curiosity and a genuine interest to this. And I think that's a good, it sounds like to me a really good sort of balancing out, because there's a lot of interpretation. And anyway, I slight digression into trivia. Are you familiar with the band They Might Be Giants from New York?
Yes.
So they have an alphabet of nations where they go through. You got to look that up.
Yeah,
I know,
I'll look
because
it up.
we used to play those educational videos from They Might Be Giants for the kids, because it was music I could stand to listen to myself while they were learning about numbers and geography, and who knew, right? They Might Be Giants did these CDs with Disney, and the alphabet of nations goes from A to Z. You might enjoy that one as well. So that's super cool. And also the music, background, to have that as a backdrop, and the Jewish liturgical studies. So other than that, when you first got involved, what was it that jumped out at you in terms of your research and understanding this database and what it does and what it might do?
Yeah, I think what struck me so much about it the first time I saw it was how comprehensive it was. And what it was just a presentation that Todd Johnson, who ended up becoming my mentor, he was the one running the database at the time. I now know it was kind of his standard. This is what's happening in the world, kind of old hat for him. But I remember seeing it for the first time and thinking, this is information that literally everyone should have. Like, everyone should know where they fit in this large scheme of religion and non-religion. And this data, to some people it might just be data just kind of exists in the world, but for me it was actually really personal, because every single person in the world fits in this global puzzle in some way. And that's the beautiful thing about a taxonomy. I know it's like the geekiest thing maybe anyone's ever said on your podcast. A beautiful thing about a taxonomy in this case is everyone fits, everyone has a place, everyone has a role, and that means we are together in some way. And it's just this picture of humanity and of people coming together. Even though a lot of people think religion pulls people apart, there's something about the way this project comes together and fits. It's like we're in this puzzle piece together. And really, the demography of religion is just an 8 billion piece puzzle, right? Every person in the world fits somewhere in it. And that, to me, I think was really striking and really attractive. And that's what made me think I want to be a part of this.
Well, there is definitely a geeky element, but to me, taxonomy, it is a beautiful thing, right? The ability to agree on what it is that we're saying and what it is that picture's worth 1,000 words. And so many times people are talking past each other because we haven't defined our terms, and taxonomy is kind of like a level above that. Yeah. There's this Baha'i quote that goes like this: "Let all associate, therefore, in this great human garden, even as flowers grow and blend together side by side." So that just came to mind as you were talking about this massive puzzle. The other thing that came to mind is the Tower of Babel, right? Where in that story, there was a unity that was developing under Nimrod. Nimrod built a city called Bab-el, the gate of God. And then God came down and looked at this because he was now building a tower to heaven. That's the story from the book of Genesis. And then God didn't like what he was seeing, and he said, this isn't unity. This isn't the gateway to me. This is confusion. He said, and he called it Babel. And then he confused the languages as the story goes, and the people couldn't talk, couldn't work together, and had to quit building this tower. How I understand that is this was a human effort to sort of have unity in conformity, right? A coercive effort to align everybody around a person, Nimrod, and his achievements and his tower, right? And there's this imposing fear, autocratic domination going on, bringing all people together under this banner. And so, obviously, you can interpret that in a number of different ways, but I've interpreted it to show that that kind of unity isn't what we're looking for, but unity and diversity, unity that allows these different understandings and these different expressions, and yet nonetheless somehow still works towards an overall unity at a higher level. These are just some of my thoughts at the beginning of this. Do you see that at all? And when you talk about a taxonomy and a puzzle and everyone fitting in there somewhere?
Yeah, a major theme of world Christianity studies is unity and diversity. And I think there is a such thing as world Christianity, defined as people who self identify as Christians, despite the huge diversity that exists within Christianity, the ethnic diversity, the linguistic diversity, the cultural diversity, the political context diversity, and so on and so forth. Some people may think, oh, these Christians, they all speak different languages and they read the Bible in different languages, and they, Christianity in one place looks really, really different than Christianity in another. This is like not unified in any way. I don't think so. I think there's actually something about people calling themselves Christians, even though that might mean something slightly different in different places, depending. But they're choosing to self-identify as Christ followers in some way, despite their differences. They're reading the same book, and they're living that out in their context. So that's why I think there is a such thing as world Christianity, as opposed to some people who prefer the plural, Christianities, as if there are all these different ones, like a very scholarly kind of debate. I actually really have very little patience for these kinds of scholarly debates. World Christianity exists as a whole of the people who call themselves Christians. That to me is what it is, and it's unity and diversity. And I think that's a really important message, especially for kind of our day and age and what's happening in the world. If we can, figure out a way to work together, know each other, support each other despite the diversity, that is a good thing.
Well, one more question in this sort of opening segment before we go to a quick commercial break and then dive deeper. That is this idea of past, present, and future. Your own parents came from different traditions, which, go back a couple, 3 generations, and these people were condemning each other to hell over their differences. But already in your parents' generation, there was a bridge, the gap was bridged, and you had Protestants and Catholics beginning to marry rather than condemning each other to hell. Not everyone liked it, I'm sure. Not everyone went along with it. It had some tension, but what we see here is an evolution and a migration. Do you want to comment on that time element here before we go to the break?
Yeah, I think a piece of that is, again, maybe unity and diversity is maybe too strong of a term for some of the Protestant Catholic debates. I mean, Vatican II helped with that a lot to kind of heal the hurt between Protestants and Catholics. But I think over time, especially in the American story, as the generations, went on and assimilation happened, we see that we have a lot more in common than keeps us apart. And no one in my family would ever say anything about Protestants and Catholics marrying. We have Catholics and Jews marrying. We have Protestants and Jews marrying. Like, we've got more diversity now. And as the generations go on, that is kind of part of the American story, that we have more diverse families, and we see that as a good thing, and something that we welcome and we value, and those are principles I want to pass on to my children, that we value diversity and we see equality, and we see the image of God in all peoples. So the Protestant Catholic story is really a great example of this, because as you're right, there was so much tension and death and destruction over the differences between Protestants and Catholics. And look where we are now, where Protestants and Catholics can be seen as siblings and can love each other and have families, and all these things is really a very beautiful thing and a hopeful story that we can extend this kind of relational being with other traditions as well. And there's still work that needs to be done, right, between Christians and Muslims, and between other traditions. So I see it as a hopeful story that hopefully we can emulate in other traditions as well.
Well, thank you. I think that's a perfect segue. We have actually a promotional video for a book by a reverend in the Baptist tradition, Barbara Brion. She's been on the show. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the idea of the female future of global faith. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more with Gina Zurlo.
In a world where faith takes root and blossoms, comes a journey of growth like no other. Blooming for Christ, a captivating exploration of spirituality and the remarkable parallels between a plant's journey and our own. Just as a seed must germinate to become a thriving plant, our spiritual timeline begins with a single decision. Through the insightful words of Reverend Barbara Brion, this book takes you on a transformative quest. A journey of growth that echoes the stages of a plant's life. From the tender shoot of a young believer bravely facing the world, to the full bloom of faith experiences shared and cherished. As seeds of faith are sown, new believers are nurtured, and the cycle continues just as God intended. But the journey doesn't end there. As the plant matures, so does the believer, becoming God's chosen harvester in gardens of divine purpose. Reverend Brion's guidance, rooted in scripture and wisdom, gently leads you through the seasons of your spiritual life. Join us on this journey of discovery and renewal, a journey that unveils the beauty of your faith and the transformative power of God's love. Blooming for Christ. Embrace your season of growth and let your faith bloom. Available now.
Welcome back to Creating the Image of God. We're here with Gina Zurlo. I thought that might be appropriate because of a couple of things. One is the idea of growing where you're planted, right? And there are different soils all over the planet. And the other is, this idea of a garden, right? And stages. So tell us then a little bit about how you view this evolution and the role in particular of the feminine or female in Christianity as it grows and develops globally.
Yeah, so I want to share a little bit about how I came to do this work in gender studies and world Christianity, because I'll be honest with you, I resisted it for a very long time because I didn't want to be the stereotypical woman in academia studying women. And we need women in academia studying women. I think we also need men in academia who do gender studies as well. But I really resisted it for a long time. I wrote my dissertation on a man, actually, doing quantitative studies. Also because I felt like as a woman in quantitative studies, I had to kind of cut my teeth and run with the boys, so to speak, right? And do what the men did. And I felt like studying women and gender would, to be quite honest, be bad for my career at the beginning of my career as a young female academic. And so I just kind of stuck to the facts. But the problem was, I am a woman in world Christianity and I am a woman in academia. And I was attending a lot of global Christian, this is part of my job. I attend a lot of global Christian conferences and I meet a lot of people from around the world. And in kind of the 2015.
Well, I have to throw in here, one of the things that impressed me was a picture of you handing a book to the Pope. So you do meet a lot of people.
I do meet a lot of people. But now we have a new Pope, of course. So I got to write another big book to give it to that Pope. So I'm working on it. So in this time, kind of 2015, 16, 17, I was attending a lot of global Christian conferences, and I just kept noticing how few women there were in these rooms, and then especially how few women were on the main stage. And yet I had been learning in my doctoral program. I did my PhD under Dana Robert at Boston University School of Theology, who's one of the leading scholars of women in world Christianity. And I was learning from Dr. Robert that world Christianity is what she calls a women's movement, that these churches have always been full of women, and you cannot ignore the gendered realities of world Christianity. But here I am, consistently one of the only women in the room. And so this all came to a head at a meeting in Bogota, Colombia in 2018, where again, this dynamic was happening. And frankly, I got fed up, as a lot of women tend to do before they start to do something to enact changes. I got fed up and I said, where are the women in world Christianity? And why are they not in these rooms? So that's where I hatched this idea of the Women in World Christianity Project, to do the first ever global research of the percent Christian female of every denomination in every country of the world. Because I'm like a go big or go home type of person. If you can't do it in every denomination or in every country, I don't want to do it. And that's also just the structure of the World Christian Database.
No
That's why it has to be
congregation
that
left
way.
behind.
You got it. You got it. So really all this work in gender studies came out of my own personal experience, what I was learning and what I knew to be true in the history of Christianity and in the present of Christianity. But there was just this massive data gap that people were just not asking the question of what percent of my congregation or my denomination or my network is women. And that's a basic fundamental demographic characteristic that we should know. And so doing this research really revealed the massive data gap, but that it is true that world Christianity is majority female. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I don't think there'd be a such thing as world Christianity if not for women. But that does not get told. That story does not get told the way that it should.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, quick question, and I've seen this already come through in the chat about denominations and the fragmentation. And I don't know if it was you that gave me the statistic a few months ago, but I'll invite you to share if you have a current number. How many denominations are they, and how is that classified?
Yeah, so like any good social scientist, I have to say, it depends on your definition. Right. The definition of the World Christian Database is that a denomination is counted by country. So if you are, say, whatever, American Baptist in the United States is counted as a denomination. If American Baptists found an American Baptist church in Zambia, that counts as another denomination. So there's many different American Baptist denominations by country. So we estimate there's around 40,000 denominations in the world. Most of those are Protestants. A lot of those are Pentecostals. And because these traditions tend to split off from each other, whether it's a theological disagreement or over race or something else. So Protestants, Independents, Pentecostals, Evangelicals tend to break away and start new churches, unlike Catholics and Orthodox, which have a different kind of ecclesiastical structure. So a large majority of those are Protestants and Pentecostals.
So globally then, there are not, if I'm understanding this correctly, there are not different Catholic denominations by definition.
Generally not. Generally not. There are some exceptions. There's been a few Catholic breakaway groups. There's also Eastern Rite and, the Lion Rite, but generally not.
Wow, that's helpful for me to understand that statistic and what it means. The other question I have regarding that is what constitutes Christianity versus a sect versus a cult, and how is that determined in your database?
Yeah, so because this is a social science project, we're using the gold standard of self-identification. If you call yourself a Christian, I count you as a Christian. Likewise, if you call yourself a Buddhist or you call yourself a Muslim or whatever you call yourself is what you are counted as. I'm not going to make a theological distinction whether you are or you aren't. That's not my job. My job is to track self-identification. And self-identification can be you check a box on a census or on a survey that you are something, or self-identification can be via your membership in a religious organization. So if you are a member of the Roman Catholic Church, that is a form of self-identification as well.
So Messianic Jews would be considered Christians. Would they also be considered Jews by, is that a thorny
Why
one?
do you have to pick one of the hardest ones right off the bat, Wade? Come on.
Because I'm a geek and I'm fascinated by this.
Perfect. Well, I mean, of course, Judaism is different because it's both a religion and an ethnicity.
Yep.
And in the World Christian Database, we track religion and ethnicity. So you have Jews in the world who are ethnically Jewish and Christian, and that would be kind of your Messianic Jewish. And then you, of course, have Jews who are ethnically Jewish and just Jewish religiously. So we track both in the World Christian Database, but Messianic Jews would be counted religiously as Christians, but ethnically as Jews.
The other reason for that question is, I don't know if we ever talked about this, but I was a minister in something called the Worldwide Church of God. And I sort of explained who and what we were as being Messianic Jews in reverse. We weren't Jewish by ethnicity, but we kept the Jewish holy days. We kept the Jewish Sabbath, right?
Yeah.
So we kind of went backwards to grab a hold of pieces of the law of Moses, which we felt were still valid. So, but we would have definitely identified as Christians, though, again, by some of those litmus tests, they might have considered us not Christians because of certain other beliefs that we had. So
Right.
really pleased to understand a little bit more about your work and how you would view this as, one big gigantic puzzle that does have this basic unity by self-declared desire to be part of the body of Christ, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So then how much time, energy was spent on taking it to that step of identifying the percentage of women in all these denominations and congregations? Is that an ongoing project? Have you reached a plateau? 80-20 rule? How are you doing with that?
Yeah, so in the first round of research, we did add the variable of percent Christian female to the World Christian Database. So you can go in and what percent of the United Methodists in Zimbabwe are women? We can answer that question. But we were missing a lot of data. And so we had to create kind of global averages or regional averages and paint with a broad brush because there just wasn't enough data available to get that level of detail. But because it's a variable in the World Christian Database, whenever we do denominational research or we do census data collection, we are constantly updating that variable. But where I took it from there, which again is something I resisted. Maybe I should learn my lesson of the things you resist end up being the things you should be doing. I don't know, maybe something biblical in there too. But I resisted doing studies of women in leadership because again, when you dive into the lit review of who's talking about women in world Christianity, the number one thing that comes up is the leadership question. Where can women be ordained? Where can they be pastors, et cetera, et cetera? And my student research assistants who were working with me on this kept saying, Dr. Zurlo, we can't find any data that you're looking for, but we're finding all this stuff about leadership. Are you sure you don't want to study leadership? And for years I said, no, we're not studying leadership. Everyone's studying leadership. And then we finished what we could with the data stuff. And I said, okay, let's do the leadership question now, because that was the number one thing people were asking. And as a researcher, if I get asked the same thing over and over again that I don't have an answer to, eventually I got to find you an answer. So the next round of research was on where can women serve as pastors in these denominations and where can they serve on other kinds of decision-making bodies. And so I did some research and the results are published in an article in the Review of Religious Research that showed where are women allowed to be pastors and where they are allowed to be in decision-making bodies, not necessarily where they are. That would be really difficult to know exactly where women are serving. And so I created this data set that was representative of about 78% of all of the Christians in the world, looking at the top 5 largest denominations in every country of the world. And I manually researched where they can serve as pastors and where they can serve on some other kind of decision-making body. It is as tedious as it sounds. It took forever. No research assistant help on this, just me, myself, and I in my database on this one. And we found that about 83% of all Christians in the world worship in churches where women can serve on some kind of decision-making body, which was a huge finding, a huge number. 83% of Christians worship in churches in the world where women can serve on some kind of decision-making body, a parish council, an executive board, something like that. And then about 45% of all Christians in the world worship in churches where women can serve as pastors, not necessarily where women are serving as pastors. So, for example, in the United States, we have survey data that shows about 12% of American congregations are led by women. Well, my research shows that about 55% of Christians in North America worship in churches where women are allowed to be pastors, but only 12% are being led by women. So the gap, right? When we do gender studies, we're measuring gaps, right? So 55% can, but only 12% are. This is the gap that we need to work on closing, right? If women are allowed, why aren't they if they are technically allowed to? And the reason is because of the leaky pipeline to leadership. There's so many places along the way where women fall out of the pipeline and, to leadership structures. They don't have the support. They don't have the funds. They get married. They have kids. They, whatever it is. And women fall out if they don't have the proper mentorship and support to, kind of attain these leadership positions. So that was the next round of research that came from that.
Yeah, I'm thinking about a couple of questions here. One is, and you probably don't have an answer to this, because I kind of gather this is relatively recent and maybe even still ongoing to a degree. But is there a time element, a time lag? Do you have any historical data? Is that number of where they are allowed to growing? And if it was fairly recent that some of those decisions were made, then to your point, there was no track. Women wouldn't have chosen to go down a path where there was no end game, where there was no arrival, right? Why would you go study to become a leader, a decision maker in an ecclesiastical body if you wouldn't ever get in?
Yeah. No, the historical data question is a fantastic question. And we know that a lot of these denominations didn't allow women pastors until, right, the second wave feminism in the 1970s, right? So we're really still talking about the first and second generation of women who would even dream, generally. We have lots of historical examples of women preachers and trailblazers and glass ceiling breakers and all that. But in terms of like structural ability to do this kind of work, right? Women couldn't even have credit cards until the 1970s. So this is still a very recent thing that women had these opportunities. But we still have a problem of models of little girls in churches who don't see women performing these roles and then can't see themselves doing it. And so this is a long game, essentially, of kind of working our way up to having proper representation of women in these congregations that have always been majority female. That's the connection between this first round and the second round.
And that was my second question. I want to get to that in a second. Well, actually, I'll get there and then I'll come back to this other question. So do you have like a hierarchy of percentages? Like, do you have an overall percentage at the very top of the pyramid of data, X% globally? And then can you share a few differentiations of, in this denomination or in this tradition, it's higher or lower female membership? Because myself and maybe others have kind of had this impression that they're actually probably more than 50% of congregants, of parishioners, of members are women. We do a lot of sort of Bible study, spiritual discussion kinds of things, and more women come than men usually.
Yeah. Totally, that tracks with with the data. I would say almost everyone's anecdotal evidence and experience tracks with the data, because almost anyone I've ever spoken to, literally anywhere in the world, says, "Oh yeah, my church is all women. Oh yeah, my mother, my grandmother, my auntie, introduced me to the faith." I mean, this has been going on for generations. So generally, we find that Protestant churches and tend to have higher percent Christian female. And some of what I might call, like, maybe this is an unfair term, but like the opt-in churches, as opposed to like the state churches, churches where people choose and they convert or they switch into it, generally have higher percentages of women,
versus
because
opt-out
women,
churches.
well, versus stay in churches, versus I was born into this church,
Right.
like I was born in the Catholic Church, I was born in the Orthodox Church, and then people who convert or switch to evangelical or Pentecostal or Protestant churches, you tend to see a higher percent Christian female in those, because generally women are more likely overall to switch religions than men. Women are more likely to be boundary crossers. They're more likely to cross ethnic boundaries, religious boundaries, than men are. The research seems to suggest this. So it makes sense that women would be in contact with people who might want to encourage them to join their church, right? Or there's just something in this other tradition that they're lacking from this tradition, maybe specifically to women. Like our church allows women's ordination, or our church provides opportunities for women. Could be something like that. One of the highest ones tends to be Jehovah's Witnesses, actually. End up coming out pretty high percent Christian female in the data.
Wow. Okay, so my other question is more personal, right? As we think about a trend of more women in leadership, in decision-making capacities within religions, I want to dig a little bit deeper into what you've shared about your own journey and the resistance of being that woman, or that kind of a data researcher, or that kind of, whatever, on the topic of women in religion, women in leadership. I'm just going to invite a tiny bit of reflection out of curiosity and to see how that might also be impacting this. What are some of the reasons why you would have your own resistance to go into that topic? It sounds like there's a little bit of a sort of a conflict even in why or how within yourself. I just want to unpack that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. So I think part of it is I had two main mentors in my doctoral work, who were both fantastic and supported me 100% no matter what. I could not be more blessed and fortunate to have these two people. Dana Robert at Boston University, teaching me women and history and world Christianity and all this amazing stuff. And then Todd Johnson at the World Christian Database, teaching me demography and social science and self-identification and all that. And I always felt a little bit of tension between these two worlds, because in kind of the world Christianity space, there were lots of women, and I had a female mentor and she was sharing her experiences and what that was like. And then in the quantitative social science world, it was just a much more male dominated world. I mean, who ends up doing quantitative anything? Usually it's men. And I felt like I had to prove myself in both of these worlds, and it felt harder to prove myself in the world dominated by men. And I felt like just by being present in the room as a young woman, I was immediately being judged for not knowing enough. Whether or not that's actually true, I don't know. But that was my experience and my perception as a young woman in these spaces. And also seeing spaces that, the classic conference mantle, the panel of all men. How many times did I see a mantle after mantle after mantle of men talking about quant? and again, if you don't see yourself, if you don't see anyone like you, this applies to race, it applies to ethnicity, it applies to gender, right? Then is that really a space for me? And I really wanted that to be my space. I mean, this was my calling, my passion, and I really wanted to take this project and I wanted to be taken seriously. And so I developed in my own mind, the only way to be taken seriously is to not talk about gender, which is terrible. I mean, this is terrible. And I hope anyone listening to this recognizes that I was clearly wrong. I mean, I hope that I was wrong, but that was my lived experience and that's how I felt.
Well, I completely hear you. I'm also just reflecting on this in terms of our own path and our own desire and how we view and want to serve, right? So it sounds like to me that what was wrong about it is you knew where you wanted to go, but there was some conflict within that about being a woman wanting to go that route, and there was just a struggle somehow. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
obviously it's not wrong or right. Whoever chooses to do whatever they choose to do. It's
Yeah, and
it's it's complex. Is I guess what I'm saying.
yeah, and of course, the irony about it is my male mentor, Todd Johnson, had every bit of confidence in me. I
Yeah.
mean, took me on when I knew absolutely nothing, frankly, and taught me everything I needed to know and like placed all of his faith and trust in me that I would be able to do this and never once doubted me. And so I had this incredible mentor who knew those spaces and could operate well in those spaces say, I believe that you can operate in those spaces. But there was still something really deep down inside that made me doubt that I could really do it. Um, so it took many years, really many years, to do the PhD, to get my name out there, to really have the confidence that I have now to say, no, I do belong in this space. I do know this. I mean, the work that I do at the World Christian Database, there's like two people in the world who do what we do at the World Christian Database, and I feel really confident in it now. But it took a long time for me to get there.
Well, I'm just grateful that you did persist, that you did go that route, because this is just a really fascinating and wonderful discussion. We're going to go to a quick commercial break. This one is actually about a book that takes a really broad approach to this issue of unity and diversity. When we come back, we're going to ask the question, where are you growing next? Given all this, what's next on the horizon, and also how can people get engaged with the database, with you, with your work, and we'll dig into that a little bit. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Gina Zurlo on Created in the Image of God.
In a world where religions often talk past each other, what if we just sat down and listened? Facets of One is a simple devotional, bringing together scripture from the world's faiths, centered on one truth: God is one. From the Bible to the Quran, from Krishna to Christ, each voice speaks in turn, without argument, without division. You don't have to agree on everything. Just be willing to pray, to listen, and to come together. If you're longing for something deeper than noise and division, this is a different kind of conversation. Facets of One. Many voices, one God. Will you start a circle?
So that, to give a little bit more of an endorsement, is actually a fascinating project in and of itself. There are right now are launching around the nation groups of people who are coming together to just read these quotes from different traditions on 9 key topics, that there is just one God. It actually takes the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God, the Lord is one. And it asks, is that unique? And the thought was it probably was somewhat unique. It turns out it's really not that unique if you take a little bit of a broader view. Even something like the Tao, right, has something very almost eerily similar to that in it. And to just sit with that and understand this big mosaic globally, it's a fascinating project. So I thought that one might be a good one to air tonight. So where are you growing next? Given all this, given that you've accomplished so much in the time you've been there, what's next on the horizon, and how can people get involved or tap into the information, the data, and or participate in some way?
Yeah, I think what's next is something that I always try to do at the World Christian Database, which is to listen. I do a lot of talking and a lot of telling people what's happening around the world. And that's the real gift of having this privilege of this 30,000 foot view to see kind of what's happening worldwide. But I cannot do that without the local. This whole project is about connecting the global and the local. And so I'm really trying to listen very carefully to what Christians are asking and what they're looking for on the ground. And there's a few themes that are emerging from that. One is a continued question about women in leadership. I was with some women in Fiji a couple years ago, sharing my work on women in world Christianity and women in leadership. And all these women happened to be ordained in their denominations. And they said, okay, that's all fine and good that you figured out where we can be pastors, but we know that already. We want to know where we can be the very top. Have you figured that out yet, of where we can be the final authority? And I said, no, but I will do it. So I am doing it and working on that project now with a very talented researcher, Molly Wall, who's working with me. And we are figuring out where can women serve at the very top of ecclesiastical organizations. And turns out it is much more complex than either one of us thought it was. Another question we're getting asked a lot right now is the relationship of Christianity and politics, especially with all the Christian nationalism discussion. Christian nationalism is a transnational movement. It is a world Christianity question in the sense of what happens in one place is impacting Christians in another place and in another place. And so doing some work on global politics and world Christianity. And then the third question I'm getting quite a lot is about Gen Z and the younger generations. Either the question, how do we keep the young people in our churches? Or what are you seeing of what youth are thinking and responding to matters of faith? So those are kind of the three big questions that I am sensing that people are asking. And so I want to do some work in those areas so I can have reasoned, well-researched answers to those questions.
Wow. So let me ask a question real quick about the second one, Christian nationalism. How do you view or define that in terms of world Christianity, in which the national aspect might be downplayed to a degree, if you know what I mean?
Well, I guess the way that we're talking about it in world Christianity discourse is places in the world where Christians want their governments to be Christian, right? To be explicitly Christian. So thinking of Zambia, right? Zambia is the only country in Africa that actually has declared itself a Christian nation. Okay, that's a really interesting thing. What does that mean for Zambia to be a Christian nation? How does that compare to somewhere like Uganda, where Christians have a lot of political voice? How does it compare to what's happening in Brazil with what happened with Bolsonaro? How does it compare to Donald Trump? How does it compare to Hungary? And what are the connective strands between all of these? And there are connective strands, whether it's media, social media, personal relationships, theology, missionaries, colonialism. There are connective strands that are happening here. So that's the world Christianity discourse as it relates to the Christian nationalism question, is kind of the interaction between all these and where these ideas come from and how they move worldwide.
Wow, thank you. So one thing that comes to mind, this is a big tangent. Years ago, we learned about this term ISIS, right? The Islamic State. And I'm a novice. I don't really know much about this, but I looked into it a little bit. And you have Muslim majority nations, and then you have nations which are so-called Islamic states, where they essentially have a theocracy and where the government is tied in, and you have Sharia or Sharia law as part of the law of the land. Those are Islamic states, and there are like I think 25 Islamic states, and then there are some additional 25 Muslim majority states, right?
Mm-hmm.
We might have majority Christian nations, but this designation exists in Islam. And when I heard you describing, Zambia and what you're doing there, I just saw a parallel. Have you looked at that or thought about that at all? I know it's outside your scope to look at Islam, but it just was interesting to me.
Yeah, no, I think it's a helpful parallel because you can have a Christian majority country that's not a Christian country. You know what I mean? So the demography is connected to identity in a lot of ways, of course, But just because you are Christian majority does not mean you are a Christian nation, in the sense that Christianity is enshrined in your constitution as a nation. So like the United States, is the United States a Christian nation? Well, it's the largest religion in the US, but is it enshrined in the Constitution that there are special protections for No, everybody
Like the
knows
opposite.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's literally explicit to not do that. um, so that's
Well,
a
and
very different thing.
this is interesting in light of that Tower of Babel story that I talked about at the beginning, because when you think about it, it is that sort of coercive aspect, right? Of insisting that everybody conform
Right.
to that norm.
Right.
And where do we set the boundaries? And freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, these are important questions. And I kind of feel like from a social science and a sociology perspective, what's your kind of take on that sort of fundamental questions of what should be? Maybe that's not where your focus is, but
No, not at all.
you're analyzing what is, right?
What is? Yes, yeah. So my question is, what is? What are people thinking, feeling, acting, doing? Not I don't ask questions of what should be, frankly, except for when it comes to, my own perspective on what is just and right and good in the world, right? Like, I believe in diversity, I believe in pluralism, I believe in freedom of speech, I believe in choice, all kinds of choice, religious choice. That's what makes, like, we live in a democracy, choice. So I have my personal values, I think, of what should be. But as a social scientist, I like to hear what other people think should be, and I can describe to you the trends of what people think should be. But that's kind of where I stop, I suppose.
Awesome. Well, what else would you like to share? I've asked a number of questions. I want to go to some questions from the audience, but before we do, is there anything you'd like to add that we sort of didn't cover in this basic overview of your work and the research that you're doing?
Yeah, I just want to say, in case people are not familiar with the World Christian Database and World Religion Database projects, they are online databases that track membership and affiliation of 18 categories of religion and non-religion in every country of the world. So these are the only resources that can tell you how many Methodists are in Zimbabwe, how many Pentecostals are in Indonesia, and how many Buddhists are in Norway, in the past, present, and future. So that's the big picture of what we're doing here. And the hope is that these data help empower not just Christians, people of all faiths, journalists, government, students, researchers, to have good data in their decision making and in their research.
Awesome. So I think one question that we didn't really cover perhaps enough of is this whole trend timeline. So some of your work is more recent, but what are some of the demographic data changes over time that the database of world religions has been tracking or reporting on? And when was it started?
Yeah, so the World Christian Database project started in the 1960s, actually by a British missionary living in Nairobi, Kenya, when he saw these incredible changes happening in African religion and African Christianity in particular, where African-led Christian movements were breaking away from the mission-founded churches and starting what we now call African independent Christianity. And so we started to quantify these new movements. And that's really at the core of who we are at the database. It's tracking new movements. And one of the biggest trends that really serves as the foundation of world Christianity studies as a whole is what we call the demographic shift of Christianity to the global south. So in the year 1900, only 18% of all Christians lived in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Oceania. But today, 69% of all Christians live in the global south. And by the year 2075, it could be 83% of all Christians live in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Oceania. That is a massive change in the world's largest religion. And that's why World Christianity Studies exists. What does it mean that Christianity is now majority global south? What new histories do we need to uncover? What new languages should we be operating in? What new stories need to be told?
Fascinating. And is that partially due to not only perhaps a lot of growth, but also maybe shrinking participation in some of the northern climates?
Yes, so it's a
Europe and America.
combination. Yeah, it's a combination of religious decline, Christian decline in Europe and North America. It's the product of colonialism and mission to Asia and Africa, and also the result of a massive population boom in Africa. So you had many people in sub-Saharan Africa become Christians and then had large families. And so now we have Africa, which grew from 9% Christian to 49% Christian over the 20th century, where the average age of Christians is 19 years old. So, and this is the demographic center. Africa has the most Christians of any continent in the world now. So a lot of questions about the future of world Christianity through the lens of sub-Saharan Africa.
Do you do any research on the impact of the religion in those nations, those cultures, economies, or is that beyond the scope?
So really my demographic work is the descriptive work and providing that big picture context. But there are so many fantastically talented world Christianity scholars and scholars of African Christianity who get more into those details of people who know the Nigerian situation really well or know the Democratic Republic of the Congo really well, who can answer those questions better than I can, and who've done really deep research into the impact of Christianity in these places. So I think other scholars who do more historical, ethnographic, kind of political science work are better suited to answer those questions than I am.
Certainly a rich field of study. So looking over the questions that came in from the audience, some of them, we've answered. I brought up that one about branches, and somebody commented on the picture of the Pope. There's a picture you can show your grandkids for some bragging rights.
I will.
And I think right around the time we were about to get to this question, how many branches don't allow women to preach or become pastors? So I think we answered that, unless you have anything else to say about that one.
One thing I do want to say actually about the women preachers is there's so much gray area in this. So it's actually, it's hard to say, oh, this church does and this church doesn't. So if you look at like the Anglican Communion, every diocese of the Anglican Communion has a different stance on whether women can be priests, bishops, or archbishops. So you can't make a blanket statement about the whole Anglican Communion. You can't even make a statement about Anglicanism in Australia, because the Sydney diocese doesn't allow women priests, but the other dioceses do. So there's a lot of nuance that needs to happen when you talk about the women in leadership question.
This was another follow-up question. Ask if there are certain countries who have a higher percent of women leaders in the church.
That's a hard question because Catholics and Orthodox don't have women priests. And so it's hard to answer it by country, because it's really the ecclesiastical tradition that leads the answer to this question. So you might think that the global north would have more women leaders. Oh, they're more progressive, or like Western values, feminism, whatever. But actually, the global south has a higher propensity for women leaders than the global north does. And it's because of differences in ecclesiology. So it's not really country specific, it's more church specific.
This one, unfortunately, I'm not sure. I'm inviting Cut there 74 to reiterate this question. Yeah, it is. What do you contribute that to? But I can't remember the context of where this question came in. But if you want to throw that back in the chat, we can maybe get to it. One last question here as we're winding towards the end of time here. I'll bet technology plays a part in it as well. The ability to look things up online, text each other, email, etc. Again, I'm not sure the exact context of that comment.
Whatever it is, technology has a part in it anyway. Literally everything we've talked about, technology is playing a role in. And if we're talking about transnational stuff in world Christianity, how is stuff transnational now? It's technology. So that is something that I think needs a lot more research, actually. What is the role of technology and the spread of ideas and all that in religion?
So are we coming up on like a 70th anniversary then? of the
of the database.
of the database?
We're getting there. We're getting there.
Is,
Do you want
is anything
to? No, not yet. I will confess, I'm actually really bad at these kinds of historical markers, but it's something. Maybe once we hit 70, I'll throw us a 70th birthday party.
Yeah, awesome. 70, right? That's a biblical thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's true.
All right. Well, Gina, this has been just amazing. Everything I'd hoped it would be and more to have you on the show. We are running out of time. Basically, I'll just be airing the sneak peek. But what words do you want to leave for the audience? And again, where can they engage directly with you or with the database?
Yeah, so I am all over the internet, speaking of technology. Google my name, find my Harvard Divinity School profile. My email is on there. You can reach out to me. Go to worldchristiandatabase.org and keep asking questions about global things. The global is really interesting and the global interacts with the local. So keep asking big questions.
Awesome. I'm putting that right there. Let's make sure I spelled that correctly. worldchristiandatabase.org.
That's it.
And your name is up there on the screen. And final words for the audience before we go to the sneak peek.
Ask me big questions, and if I don't know them, we'll find answers together.
Awesome. And my sign off is simply, you are created in the image of God. And today, I guess we might say each and every one of you globally in all the unique diversity. And God loves his creation. We'll see you all next week. Stay tuned for the sneak peek. We're doing a little slightly different format. We're going to show you both the Sunday and the Tuesday show. Some of the audience don't know we do a Sunday morning show as well as this Tuesday evening show. And Gina, we'll extend you an invitation to come back maybe on and or around that 70th anniversary to talk about the progression of these trends. It's truly been an honor. I've learned so much, and it's been fun to dig into these topics. And for those who don't know, there's a Substack account associated with this. And every week I'm publishing what I learned from our guests. So Gina, look to that article. It'll take me a couple of days to pull it together, but I'll synthesize some of the takeaways that I took away from this conversation. It's been wonderful.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yep. We'll see you all next week. Stay tuned for the sneak peek.
This week on Created in the Image of God. Tuesday at 8 p.m. U.S. Central Time. Host Wade Franson interviews Dalia Mogahed, scholar, researcher, and one of the leading voices on Muslim communities. She shares her journey from Cairo to the United States and how she came to understand herself as an American Muslim. A conversation on faith, identity, and pluralism in a world often shaped by fear, headlines, and misunderstanding. And then on Sunday at 7 a.m. Central Time, host Wade Franson, Michael Gungor, musician, author, and creative mystic. He reflects on the idea that we may be seeing reality upside down, and what it means to live in tune with something deeper, from creativity and suffering to love, being, and a quiet yes at the center of existence. Join us live this week, Tuesday and Sunday, Created in the Image of God.